Migration flow for SharePoint demo. Welcome. My name is Sten. Let's get started. The challenge. Today, we're going to look at how to migrate a legacy document management system to SharePoint. Typically, a legacy document management system consists of a database and some files located in a file share. Then there's some kind of a UI that presents the metadata, and then you can open the file. Now, in SharePoint, it is very different. In SharePoint, you have a document library and the files are stored there alongside with the metadata. In other words, together. So, a legacy document management system is 100% incompatible with SharePoint and therefore cannot migrate as is. So, in order to migrate, what we need to do is to connect each file with the associated metadata and then transfer that to SharePoint. A great technique to make that happen is called metadata-driven migration. It is a fundamental change in the way that you approach and execute migrations. Now, basically what you do is you create a migration control table with references to the physical files and all the metadata made ready for SharePoint. Now, once that table has been populated, for each row in the migration control table, you just copy the file with its associated metadata to SharePoint. That sounds easy, but how? And how to handle millions of documents to thousands of SharePoint sites? Well, here comes Migration Flow for SharePoint. It is a no-code, highly productive environment. It runs on Windows servers, and it also runs on your Windows 10 or Windows 11 desktop. It consists of pre-programmed steps that you configure and connect. It is highly visual and interactive. You can interact with many data sources, like SharePoint lists and libraries, SQL servers, CSV files, Excel files, etc. You can even call custom PowerShell if you need that. It is fully integrated with Power Automate for notification and for approval workflows. The jobs that you create by connecting the different steps can execute unattended on the built-in job server that runs as a native Windows service. I'm going to show you migration flow for SharePoint in just a minute, but let's just first go over the business case. We're going to migrate a legacy document management system into SharePoint. We're receiving a number of data sets that describes the files and also where the files should go. One of the files is an Excel file that basically describes where the physical file is stored. It also describes what is the name of the document that it should have in SharePoint, created by, and some metadata that we will convert into managed metadata, alongside a company name. Now, secondly, we're receiving another Excel file that describes what is actually on the picture. And in this case, this image file here has two bikes on the picture, a city bike and a racing bike. So we want to checkmark the products column with city bikes and racing bikes inside SharePoint. So a one-to-many relation converted into a choice column, right? That could also be managed metadata or a multi-value lookup column. Finally, there's a SharePoint list that describes where should the files end up within SharePoint, that is, site and document library. We're going to merge those three datasets together to form the migration control table. Step number one is to load the first Excel file into the SQL Server table. Step number two is to update that SQL Server table with the information about the products transformed into a multi-value value. And lastly, we're going to read the sites from the SharePoint list and update the metadata control table. Once all this is in place, we are ready to run the migration. You can see it's got company name, some metadata, and the multi-value column here, and the name for the file, and the storage location, and the destination site. Obviously, there's a lot more to migrating a legacy document management system into SharePoint than just copying the files. Let's get started with the demo. This is the Migration Flow IDE. As mentioned, it consists of a number of different steps that you combine to create your migration solution. File management is probably the one you're most familiar with, which is basically copying files from A to B. The data ETL, extract, transform, and load, is essential for document management system migration. You can extract data from any data source, almost, and load it into any data source as well. The for each looping is also essential. That is used for reading a data source and for each row in that data source do something. The group step sort of combines multiple steps into one. You can have multiple group steps in a nested structure. Now, the PowerShell step we're not going to use today. It is being used seldomly, but when it is used, it is crucial in order to be able to create the specific migration solution. The PowerShell step supports 5.1 and 7. Now, let's start by extracting the data from the Excel sheet and putting that into a SQL Server database. I will create a data ETL step. I'll give it a name, get data from Excel, like that. I can now extract my data from a given data source, and in this case I'm going to extract it from an Excel file. This is the Excel file I want to extract from. Now Migration Flow has opened the Excel file and analyzed it and found that there is one sheet within that file. That could be multiple sheets and multiple tables that you can reference independently. Now we can have a quick look at the data file. Here we go. And you can see the company name, storage location, blah, blah, blah. All right. So now we have selected the different columns from the Excel file. Now we need to specify where would we like to put that. And in our case, we would like to put it into a database table inside SQL Server. Well, we don't have a table right now in the SQL Server, so let's go ahead and create it. So first I'll say I want to put this into a database table. And then I need to select which database would I like it to go into. And I have pre-created a connection to a SQL Server here. You can see server name, blah, blah, blah. And we would like to put it into that database. We don't have a table yet. So let's go ahead and create a table based on the source, based on these columns in here. That's the easiest, quickest way. And we will call that table demo metadata, like that. Okay. Now the table has been created inside SQL Server. Let's have a look in SQL Server using the SQL Server Enterprise Management Studio. This is the SQL Server Enterprise Management Studio. We don't see the table here right now, so let's go ahead and refresh that. And now we see the demo metadata table, and it's got a number of columns in there, and these are the column that matches our Excel sheet. All right, let's bring it over here. So now we're ready to extract the data from the Excel sheet and put it into SQL Server. In this case, we're just going to create some rows in there. But since we're going to run this multiple times, we want to truncate the table before we create the new rows. We're going to say create rows, but delete all existing first. All right, so now we're ready to run. I can run this step interactively, or I can just run it silently. In this demo case, I will run it interactively so we can see what is actually going on. I'll click the run button, and I can choose between previewing the data and just running it silent. Let's go ahead with previewing. All right, so now Migration Flow has retrieved the data from Excel and shows us what's in there. And we can now click Next. And it has generated the different SQL statements that needs to run. First, we're going to truncate the table. Then we're going to insert some rows into the database, and we can run it. All right, now the step has completed, And we can go into the SQL Server Studio and have a look at, do we have some data in there? Yes, we do. So these rows originated directly from the Excel sheet. All right. That was step number 1, creating the migration control table in a SQL Server and then insert the data from the first Excel file. The next 2 steps are transforming the multi-value value from the second Excel sheet into a value that is compatible with a SharePoint choice column and update the migration control table. The third step is to go to the SharePoint list, which is basically just another data source, and retrieve the different sites for each of the files. And once that has been done, we are ready to run the migration. I have pre-created these steps and I will show you. All right, we're done with this step. Let's just close it. I have created all the other steps prior to this demo. I will show you. Let's go to the Open section and you can see here are the steps. This is the step we just created. Now you can see in the call tree out here how the different steps are being called. And the first step is a group step that sort of combines the other steps into one single job that you can run unattended. Step number 1 is to load the document data into the SQL Server table. This is essentially exactly the same that we just did. Now, the next step is to create the product multi-value and then update the metadata control table with that information. And the third step is to go to SharePoint and read the URLs for each of the companies and update the control table. And once this is done, we will initiate the migration where we run through each of the rows in that control table and do the file copy. Let's go through each of the steps. I will open the group step here. And you can see the group step calls 4 other steps. At any point in time, I can open the call tree and see how the different steps are being called and navigate to the different steps. First, we will load the data into SQL Server. Basically the same thing we just did, but we'll do that to a different table. I'll bring in SQL Server Management Studio and you can see this is the metadata table that I pre-created and it's empty. No rows. Let's go ahead and run that step. So I'll open that. Notice that I, in the IDE, can have multiple steps open at the same time. And it is easy to navigate between the different steps that you can design simultaneously. It is inherently a multitasking environment. All right, so we're going to load from the Documents Excel sheet and insert the data into the metadata table. Let's go ahead and run that visually with preview. And again, we have the data and the SQL statements it's generated. I'm going to say run. So now the table should contain some data. Let's go ahead and refresh this and say, do we have some data in there? Yes, we do. All right. So that was the first step. Let's just close this. Secondly, we're going to run through the product lines, and it's a slightly different thing that we're going to do there. We're going to read the products to each document, and let's have a look at the file so you have a sense of what's going on in there. And you can see for this file we have city bikes and racing bikes, and for this file we have 3 types of bikes. So we're going to combine multiple rows into a multi-value value that is compatible with SharePoint. All right. Basically, we're reading the information in, and then we are grouping by storage file, because for each storage file, we want to concatenate the values so that we can have a multi-value value separated by semicolon hashtag, which is the SharePoint notation. And then for each group of values, we're going to call another step that will update the product metadata column in the database. So let's have a look at the next step. So now we're simply going to update it. So we have a number of variables in play, which is the product variable and the storage file variable. And we're going to use the storage file variable as a key to do the update. And we're going to update the products column in the metadata control table. All right, let's go ahead and do that. Let's just run this interactively, step by step. First, I will show you how to load the variables manually. This is basically a debugging or development step, so you can see what's going on. All right, these are the values in the Excel sheet, and we're going to select a few. Let's just select the ones that goes into the X file, reference the X file. Next, and we're going to load the variables. All right, now the variables have been loaded. Let's have a look at them. I'll go to the variables and I will find the product column here. Here we go. And you can see racing bikes, city bikes, and mountain bikes. And the value has been formatted in such a way that it is compatible with SharePoint, right? This could also be used for managed metadata or for lookup values. All right, so now we're ready to sort of update the database table for each of those rows. I will click the run button, but in this case, we will run it silently. You can see the job is starting and now it's running. And while it is running, we can switch to the job tab and we can see what's going on while the job is running. You can see the first row, the second row, the third row, and so on and so forth. And each of those you can see when the next step is being called. All right, let's have a look at the database to see what's actually in there. And I'll bring over SQL Server Studio. And this is the result set we had previously. Notice that the color product is null. There's nothing in it. So let's go ahead and refresh that. All right, so now the call products have been updated. And you can see the multi-value value in there, ready for SharePoint. And so now we're done with that step. Next is to update the URL column. And we'll read the SharePoint list and update the database. It is essentially the same that's going on, but in this case, the source is a SharePoint list. I have a connection to my SharePoint list, companies, and these are the columns within the SharePoint list companies, and I've selected the site column and the title column. And then I'm going to use this data to update the database. And I'm going to use the company name as the key and then update the destination site. And again, I will do that interactively so you can see what's going on with preview. All right, this is the data within the SharePoint list. And I can then just select some of them or just say next and just do it for all of them. And this is the SQL statements that it will generate and execute. Let's go ahead and update that. All right. And then bring in the metadata control table where we can see that it is null initially, and then we refresh the table and ta-da, we got the site in there. All right. So now we have the metadata control table complete. All right, the migration control table is now complete and we are ready to transfer the files with the associated metadata. Step number 4 does that. It reads the migration control table, and for each of those rows in that table, it calls the step that does the actual file copy. But it does it only when the site changes. So all the files for one site will be grouped together in order to preserve performance. Let's have a look at the file management step that does the actual file copy. It uses the variable directly from the database. This will be file 1 separated by semicolon hashtag, file 2 semicolon hashtag, and so on and so forth. And then it defines the destination URL by combining the other column from the database that points to where the files should go. Notice that the file gets renamed. So the file is renamed in stream, so to speak, so the anonymously stored file gets the right name based on the metadata from the document management system. Also, the date when the file was created is retrieved directly from the file, right? So that's the only value retrieved from the file actually in this case. And the created by is resolved into a user column, and the products column, the multi-value column is inserted into the choice column. All right, let's just close this and let's go ahead and run it. But before we do that, let's have a look at the actual SharePoint sites so you have an idea about that. Company 4 here, we will see an empty document library, right? Documents, empty. So let's go ahead and run this migration and see how it pans out. And we will do that now. All right. So let's go ahead and run it silently because we don't want to, sit and look at a UI. So just run it silently. Now the job starts and it's running. Notice that we can do different things now. We can do other jobs at the same time. So you can do multiple migrations simultaneously, and you can design and run things while other things are running. So this is how it is so far, and we can retrieve the latest information about how the job is progressing. All right, now the job is complete. Notice that the files are pending in Azure, and this is one of the many multitasking features Migration Flow has. So it actually transfers the files into Azure, but it doesn't wait for Azure to sort of pick up that migration package and transfer the files. That is done asynchronously. But even so, Migration Flow is ensuring each and every file has a receipt that it is actually being copied. All right, let's go to the site and see the results. Ta-da! You see, the file has a real file name, not the anonymous file name. From the file share, it's got the modified date and time retrieved from the file. It's got the user column resolved. It's got the multi-value products column populated and some managed metadata. Well, this concludes my demonstration of Migration Flow for SharePoint. Isn't it beautiful? If you think about what we just accomplished without a single line of code, interfacing Excel, interfacing databases, interfacing SharePoint lists, doing all kinds of manipulation of data, and then super high performance transfer to SharePoint. And that is transferring thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of documents to SharePoint. Thank you so much for listening in.